Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session on You Say You Want a Revolution. And this has been such an amazing series, and I've been really pleased with how many different scholars we've heard from and so many different parts of the JTS universe. And today we are talking to a part of our JTS universe that we talk to less in these series, the William Davidson School of Education, Graduate School of Education. And this is really a program that has shaped Jewish educational life in the United States over the last century. And I'm excited to hear about this particular part of Jewish life that I think has personal resonance for many of us. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Director of Outreach for the Division of Lifelong and Professional Studies. And before we jump into our kind of bigger program today, I want to be mindful that we're gathering today, and we are mindful of the people affected by the violence at Bondi Beach. This is Hanukkah. It's a time when we speak about bringing people together. We speak about light into dark moments. And my hope for the world is that we can maintain hope, healing, safety, and care for all of those who are impacted. Today, we are going to hear from Dr. Abigail Uhrman with special guest Howard Blas and Elana Naftalin-Kelman. They're our partners from the National Ramah movement, and we are so excited to hear from them. Additionally, I want to thank our anonymous sponsor at the Chacham level for contributing to this program. And I also want to thank everyone. This has been a fabulous series, and so many of you have donated to support the series, and that makes this possible. With that said, our next series is going to launch at the beginning of February. I'm still in the works of figuring out all of the themes and ideas, but I can tell you it's going to be related to the environment, sustainability, and climate issues, and it's going to be connected with inter-religious dialogue. So stay tuned. That will be forthcoming. We are going to, So today our session is Revolutionizing Belonging, Disability Inclusion, and the Future of Jewish Camp. And this is going to really focus on looking at research on disability and inclusion at camp that has been spearheaded by our faculty member, Dr. Abigail Uhrman. She's the director of the William Davidson Graduate School of Jewish Education and an associate professor of Jewish education in the William Davidson Graduate School. She conducts research on inclusion and diversity in Jewish education, and she's worked with a number of Jewish summer camps, both in training senior leadership and researching inclusive practices in camp settings. And because this is a slightly different format today, where as opposed to we have one speaker providing a sense of things, we're going to do things a little bit differently. She's going to be introducing themes and then having a conversation about those themes with Howard and Elana. And then we will have time for questions at the end. If you share your questions with me, and there are particularly parts that are unclear or you need clarifications on, share those questions with me and I'll share them with them. You can share all your other questions with me as well. I also will be handling technical support as well. As always, I want to thank my colleague Tani Schwartz-Herman for helping get the program running and facilitate them. But without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Abigail Uhrman, who is going to start this program by giving us a lay of the land of inclusion and camp.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellie. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. There's so many of you. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. If it's okay, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint to share. I'm not sure if your previous speakers have had that, but I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'm going to sort of go in and out using the PowerPoint just to sort of help focus our discussion, and then also talking to Howard and Elana as we go. Okay. Oh, got it. Not the beginning. Hold on one second. I apologize. Okay. So as Ali said, we're going to be talking about revolutionizing belonging. Today's talk is going to be about my research in diversity and inclusion in Jewish camps. It's based on a bunch of different studies I did over the past, I guess, 12 years or so in Jewish camping. First, I'm going to introduce our presenters. First, everyone say hi to Howard Blas. Howard currently serves as a senior advisor at the National Ramah Tikvah Network for the Camp Ramah movement. He's worked for over 40 years in various positions with the Tikvah program, mostly at Ramah, New England, but also at Ramah, Northern California. He has led 8 Tikvah Ramah Israel trips and served as group leader for 9 birthright autism spectrum disorder trips to Israel. He recently led the first ever birthright service trip and is working with Birthright to expand their service trips for people with disabilities. Howard is a social worker and special education teacher by training, teaches Jewish studies and bar bat mitzvah to students with a range of disabilities and such special circumstances. An anthology of bar and bat mitzvah and disabilities entitled A Different Spirit, Creating Meaningful B'nai Mitzvah for Children with Disabilities, which he worked on for years with colleagues, is scheduled for publication in February 2026. So everybody keep an eye out for his new book, which is going to be remarkable and a huge contribution to the field. He writes regularly for many Jewish and secular publications, and he received numerous awards. Howard is blessed of children and grandchildren in Israel and the US, and recently made a aliyah to Tel Aviv. So Howard is zooming in from Tel Aviv. Elana Naftalin-Kelman has been working at the intersection of special education and Jewish education for over 25 years. She was inspired in this path by her time as a camper at Camp Ramah in Ojai, where she served as the director of the Tikvah program for campers and young adults with disabilities for 18 years. Elana is an adjunct professor of special education at San Francisco State University, where she teaches undergraduate students pursuing careers in special education. She is also completing her EDD at Northeastern University, where she is writing about the mental health needs of young adults with disabilities. Additionally, she consults with multiple Jewish organizations to increase inclusion opportunities of Jews of all abilities. She has taught professional development courses in differentiated instruction, behavior management, neurodiversity, inclusive classrooms, and teaching Hebrew. She lives in Berkeley, California with her husband and 3 sons. Okay, so we are really fortunate to have Howard and Elana join us today. I have had the pleasure of working with them in a number of different capacities, and we get to learn from their tremendous expertise today. We're going to start off just by sharing the major premise that I want to make is that this series is all about revolution. And we're going to talk about how disabilities and Jewish camping moved from revolution to transformation. We're actually going to start off with Howard. Howard, why don't you tell us a bit, because you were really around during the forefront of this revolution when this all began. Can you tell us a bit about the beginning of this revolution in Jewish camping?
Sure. Thanks, Abby. So I wasn't around from the very beginning, but I was around to everything that I know. I learned from the founders of Tikvah. So Herb and Barbara Greenberg are special education teachers. They lived in Long Island, New York, and I'm happy to report they're alive and well, and they live in Renana. They're in their 80s, and I think they're not able to join us tonight, but they would be blown away by what has happened in this field. But it wasn't always like this. In the late 1960s, they had what at the time was a pretty radical or crazy idea. And it goes like this, that people with disabilities should be included in Jewish summer camping. And, when we say that now, that doesn't sound so crazy. But, this was the late 1960s. People who know some history know that it was a time of social and political and cultural upheaval. It was the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. And the Greenbergs just thought that people with disabilities should be part of Jewish summer camps. And as you might guess, there was a lot of pushback. Nobody wanted it. I will put in quotes, they worried that the normal kids would leave. They worried that it would bankrupt the camps. It would ruin the structure of the camp. And of course, Ramah was the great Hebrew-speaking camp. The level of Hebrew would go down. And they shopped the idea around. People did not like it. The directors of all kinds of camps, including Ramah camps, said no way. Until one director, a man named Danny Edelman, said, we'll take it. And the reasoning was, this is a Jewish camp. If we're living Jewish values, responsibility, taking care of each other, inclusiveness, we should do it. So really, it was, I guess, the revolution happened when a couple of regular people and one director said yes. And in 1970, in Glen Spey, New York, which later moved to Camp Ramah, New England, Tikvah started with 8 campers. They were a very mixed bag, everything from someone with a learning disability to Down syndrome to cerebral palsy. And the Greenbergs did a lot of shuttle diplomacy that summer to make sure that things worked out well. And it happened. And it continued to, it was successful, and it caught on within the Ramah movement little by little. And here we are today.
Thank you. And now what was once started in 1970 by the Greenbergs has now become really normalized in Jewish camp. So according to the Foundation for Jewish Camp, their 2018 survey says that about 80% of Jewish camps now offer programs for campers with disabilities, which is, considering its humble beginnings, this is in 50 plus years, it's become really standard practice in Jewish camps. So they're not asking the question anymore of, can we let kids in with disabilities? They're asking, how do we create belonging for all? So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. What does inclusion look like and how it transforms everyone? That's really what the bulk of my research has been about. And also what that entails. What is the work of that? And what inclusion requires and what it means to make that happen. Before we get started, I just wanted a word on language. So I'm going to be using children with disabilities, neuroatypical, and children without disabilities, and neurotypical kids. I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably. There's really no consensus in the field, so I'm going to be using those words, both of those terms. And when I talk about inclusion, I'm going to be talking about a spectrum. Ilana, do you want to talk about that for a minute, and also talk about when we say disability, sort of the range of kids we're talking about?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, definitely. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here today. As Abby said, language around disability and inclusion, there's no consensus in the field. And so lots of different people talk about it in different ways. I will use language similar to what Abby used. In the field of Jewish camping, we have seen that it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. What does inclusion look like? What types of campers are included looks different at lots of different camps. The statistic that 80% of Jewish camps offer programs for campers with disabilities is amazing, and we've come far. And that looks really different at different camps. So I'll share a little bit about what I've seen at the camp I worked at, which is Camp Ramah in Ojai, and then what I've seen at other camps that I've now consulted with since I've started at camp. In Ojai, we offered 4 different tiers of support for lots of different types of kids with more high needs and kids with fewer needs, and everything in between. We offered lots of support for all different types of kids. So we offered sort of the full Tikvah model, which is what we call our program for campers with disabilities in the Ramah movement. And that model is what I call a camp within a camp. So we sort of run this much smaller camp within the much larger camp. And our Tikvah campers participate in all the same things that all the other campers participate in. Sometimes it's with, a higher camper counselor ratio. Sometimes it's at a different time. Sometimes it's for shorter or for longer, right? We modify and accommodate as needed. And most of our activities throughout the day are done in parallel to our typical peers. So even though we might think of it as a separate program, it's actually in parallel with typical peers. So at any given day or time of day, we are there with our peers. So it actually is, has inclusive pieces to it. So that's one tier of support. We offer the second tier is what we call sort of day campers. So they spend all day with their typical peers and then come back to our cabin as sort of a home base. And that allows campers to decompress after holding it together after a long day. That allows campers a little bit of a quieter home base and a little bit more personalized attention after a long day of camp. We also offer inclusion campers with push-in support. So we offer some opportunities for push-in. If we know a camper is going to have a harder time during a specific time of day, we could offer push-in support for those kids. And then we offer support that's not push-in, but sort of extra set of eyes on campers. It might be counselors who get a little bit of extra training or a division head who gets a little bit of extra training. And so we really support kids who need all different types of support and a range of support. At other camps, I've seen similar support models. Other camps do, some of those models include, one-on-one support, which is popular at many camps, adding extra staffing, mental health support from out-of-camp resources, things like that are the sort of the range of support that camps offer for their kids with disabilities.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump in. I want to start talking. So the first part I want to talk about is what I'm going to call the gift of inclusion. This is going to paint a very, very rosy picture. And this is because there is a lot of wonderful things to say. There are a lot of bright spots. There are a lot of good things happening in inclusive camping. And there are a lot of benefits for campers with disabilities, for campers without disabilities, for staff, for families, and for the camp at large. Doesn't mean it doesn't come without its own complications, but a lot of my research has actually been on sort of identifying those bright spots so that we can build on them. So we're going to start there. First, campers with disabilities. So inclusive camps give campers with disability agency. So campers who previously needed assistance navigating camp can now do that on their own. So camps that have invested in sort of physical infrastructure have allowed campers to have the independence to move around camp, moving from their bunk to the lake, from the dining hall to arts and crafts. They can do that on their own. But the deeper change isn't just physical. It's emotional, it's psychological. Independence that these campers experience reshapes how they see themselves. It's the shift that campers feel from I can do this, that from I need help to I can do this, and that confidence follows quickly. So they can make their own choices. They have privacy and autonomy. So let's say there's a bathroom, they have independent bathrooms that they can just get dressed by themselves. And they also allow them to try new things. So at one camp, for example, I was talking to a camper who, because the ropes course was newly accessible, she was able to climb to the top of the tower with limited support. That was her choice, her accomplishment. And these are things that neurotypical campers take for granted. But personal freedom, autonomy, choice, this is things that camps that have inclusive structures and inclusive infrastructures give kids with disabilities. So that means paved paths, grab bars in bathrooms, ramps at entrances, zero entry pools, all these sorts of things, removing barriers to enable independence. Connected to this, but somewhat different, inclusive camps also shift how campers with disabilities exist with others. They move from being accommodated to being full participants. That means they can participate without feeling like they are disrupting the flow of the group. So the activities flow smoothly and staff aren't scrambling to figure out how to make accommodations. It's sort of built in and the activity doesn't stop for adjustments. So this means, for example, I visited camp with a fully accessible splash pad. So campers with lower swim abilities who were once separated in the shallow end can now play alongside their peers in the splash pad. Everyone was together, no separation, no waiting for different groups. Another example, with accessible pathways, the campers with mobility issues who trailed behind, everyone can walk together. No one is held back, no one singled out. At another camp, a camper with disabilities, a full cast member in a drama play, rehearses with everyone the same schedule. So systems and a culture that camps establish that enable sort of this smooth social participation and integration. So that means that camps are proactively making accommodations. They anticipate the needs before an activity starts. They're not figuring things out on the fly. They create multi-use spaces designed for everyone. That goes back to the infrastructure we talked about before, but things are thought about ahead of time. So as they're creating new buildings and creating new spaces, they think about how can we create this with universal design so that everyone can benefit. And also when they're training their staff to think about their activities ahead of time, to design it with diverse abilities in mind from the start, not as an afterthought. And this, when all of this happens, when this is done well, and again, this is not easy, but when this is done well, campers with disability aren't defined by their accommodations. They aren't the reason activities are slowing down. They're not being separated from their peers. One parent told me, he said, at school, he's always the one who needs help, but at camp, he's just Josh. So kids with disabilities feel this sense of dignity and pride, agency, and independence. That connects to this other theme of belonging. This came up a lot in my research in all different ways. Campers really feel that the camp community is theirs. You hear campers talk about, this is my camp, my community, I belong here, this place is mine. One of the most striking findings from the FJC survey that I had mentioned before, one of the findings is that overnight camp revealed that campers with disabilities reported similar levels of belonging as neurotypical campers. There was no statistical difference between the levels of belonging that campers with disabilities and campers without disabilities reported. That was, to me, that was incredibly, incredibly powerful. The assumption might have been that campers with disabilities would have felt like they don't belong as much. Maybe they didn't feel as connected, but the data proved completely otherwise. If it's possible, any setting where it doesn't happen is a design failure, not an inevitability. And many camps achieved this. This wasn't just one camp. So the FJC data is an aggregate of many, many, many camps. So it's the model, not the miracle. And when you see this, when you look at all this, they're not just building programs or ramps, but this is measurable belonging. And some of the things that camps spoke about and campers spoke about is you saw that campers requested each other as bunkmates. So they were actively choosing to be with kids who were different than them. They were invited to reunions outside of camp, school year gatherings, b'nai mitzvah. So they were part of an ongoing community, not just summer relationships. And there were a lot of things that happened inside the camp to enable this to happen. Some of this was housing. So campers with disabilities, they were in bunks that were centrally located, either in bunks with campers without disabilities, or their bunks were located within the same area. Elana talked about sort of integrated experiences where they had either shared meals or activities, or they were part of the same program. Inclusion was a value in the camp. It was a stated value. Sometimes you could actually see it as a stated value in the camp. It was a pillar of the camp that was actually written in the dining hall. And another piece, which Howard and I have talked about a lot, but once you've gone to camp year after year after year, it's just part of what camp is. This is how we do it at camp. And in many other spaces that these kids are in, they're separated, they're pulled out for special programs, they're on the margins, but at camp, the belonging is real, it's measured, and it's unconditional. Reciprocity and contribution. In inclusive camps, campers and staff with disabilities move from being primary receivers of support to being contributors, leaders, and teachers. There are countless, and I'm sure Elana and Howard can tell us about this, examples of this happening at camp. A counselor with Down syndrome leads a dance routine during lunch and her campers watch and learn. A camper with disabilities attends camp with one-on-one support, no longer needs it, and then later works as a camp photographer. And I'm telling you, these are not stories. These are not ones I've made up. These are real things from the data. A camper with disabilities ideas become the basis for a drama production. These are not symbolic roles. They are real contributions. And this happens through many ways, through vocational pathways, activities with multiple entry points, long-term relationships. There are lots of things that camp do to enable this to happen. Being helped, the sense of that campers need to be helped is exhausting and diminishing for these kids. And feeling that you can contribute affirms that they have something to offer, and it shifts the narrative from that there's something wrong to they have something to bring. And it helps to create this sort of authentic reciprocal relationships. I promise I'm almost done with this category. There's just so much here, and there's so much richness here. Jewish identity and access for many, many campers and families. And this was true not only in my research on camps, but this came out in my research in other Jewish spaces too. People reference camp in the other research. Camp is the first or only place for many families where Jewish life is fully accessible, where they can participate in Shabbat and holidays, Jewish learning, rituals without barriers. One parent said, and I thought this was very, very powerful, camp gave us our Judaism back. For many families, they disengage from synagogue life because it's too hard, but camp becomes the entry point or the re-entry point to Jewish community. And campers really live this and feel this and participate fully in the Jewish life of camp. We're going to take a break from me talking now. Elana, I would love to hear from you since you have spent countless summers at camp. Can you please share an example of how any of these themes have played out in your experiences?
Yeah, when we were preparing for this and you asked me that question, these flooding of stories and of individual campers and their families came back. It was hard to choose just one. And as you said, Abby, these aren't just stories. These are real, the lived experiences of actual campers in our community and families in our community. I'll focus for just a moment on the Jewish identity and access. Although it's gotten better in most of our Jewish communities, in the recent past, I would say, when I first started in this field, really camp was the home for most of our family, the Jewish home for most of our families. These families were not participating in Hebrew school, certainly not day school, and weren't really able to find a home for themselves and their children in most of our, sort of established Jewish communities. And so camp really was the place where these kids found a home. There's a saying in the camp world that we live 10 for 2, which is like 10 months for 2 months, because we're at camp for 2 months during the summer. And our campers with disabilities really felt that, and their families really felt that. I would get questions all year long. Can you start a year-round program? When can Ramah help us during the year? And so the experience of them of our campers with disabilities and our staff with disabilities being a integral and important and honest part of a Jewish community was more meaningful than anything else we could have given them, I think, and especially for their parents, right? The parents finally found a community where their children were accepted for who they were and not asked to change or not complained about. One, I'll just share, I mean, and I have, a bunch of these stories, but a family who really calls Ramah their Jewish home. And, we saw this as important during COVID when camps were shut down, how many kids were engaging and how many kids missed, right, their Jewish connection. We had huge numbers of our participants and our campers log on to all sorts of online activities because they were missing that connection and they felt a real loss for that in their lives. And these families, and I've talked to so many parents who really say that Ramah is their Jewish home, Ramah is their Jewish connection, Ramah is their Jewish community. And it happens time and time again, and it's so important. And this idea of I think that the story that Howard told about the starting of these programs at Ramah, where it just took one director to say yes. In the camping movement, it often just takes one specialist or one counselor or one director to say yes and to try something new to support these kids, which is so important.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. We have so much to talk about. I'm going to try to move quickly. Okay, I want to move on to campers without disabilities because there are tremendous amount of benefits, really tremendous for campers without disabilities from being an inclusive camp. First one I want to talk about is values formation. Campers begin to see inclusion as a core part of their Jewish identity, not an add-on. And they articulate campers. I've spoken to many campers, and I've seen this in surveys, and I've spoken to camp directors. Campers begin to articulate inclusion as central to their Jewish life. I'll just share a couple things that campers said. Treating people nicely is what Judaism is. It's not abstract. It's my daily practice. Another camper said, when you live with people, you see how you want to be treated yourself. That shows me how to treat others. So camp culture sort of frames inclusion as a Jewish responsibility. It's not an add-on. It's not a program. It's not a special activity. And those values are modeled consistently by staff and by camp administrators throughout these everyday interactions. and they're also lived. So campers and inclusive camp spaces, they also see how these values are expressed. So the values that they're internalized, they also see how they are lived in their everyday actions. So small gestures of support and collaboration and empathy become instinctive. They're not taught, they just become instinctive because they're seeing them happen all around them. So if you walk around inclusive camps, you will see this everywhere. Campers are spontaneously including peers with disabilities. They're helping out, and they're not doing it because they feel like they have to, but that's just part of what they do. Holding hands to navigate other kids and navigate steep hills, pausing a soccer game to let other kids score. These are things that counselors have told me that they've seen their campers do. Another kid said, oh, I help my counselors to hold so-and-so's hand sometimes when I see that they're busy. They're living, eating, playing together, and it provides a sort of constant organic opportunities to practice inclusion. And year after year, these multi-year participation reinforces these habits, and these behaviors become instinctive. And inclusion, or at least this is what we hope, becomes second nature. And they think that's my friend who needs a hand, not this is the person that I have to help. And ideally, this should build lifelong empathy and social emotional skills and habits that transfer beyond camp to school and community and for future workplaces. We talked about this before with campers with disabilities, but reciprocal friendships. So the same as here, kids without disabilities develop real friendships with campers with disabilities. Again, they request each other for bunks, they invite them to their B'nai Mitzvah, they can stay connected over the course of the year. They spend time together over the course of multiple summers. They have shared experience. They live together. They do activities together. And these are relationships that last and transform. Campers also grow up seeing diversity, including disability, as a normal part of camp life. It's not exceptional. And critically, this normalizes all kinds of difference. Campers without disability grow up with campers with disability in their bunks or age groups and programs all around camp, and they don't see inclusion as something unique. It's just camp. It's what we do. And I say this as a researcher, and I say this as someone who grew up in a camp. Like, you learn to see and value one kind of difference, and it makes you better at seeing and valuing all kinds of difference. And this shapes campers' expectations for life. They expect diversity in all settings, school, work, community. They also become advocates and allies across all kinds of difference. Alumni carry inclusive values into their professions. We hear this in the alumni surveys, and they build more inclusive Jewish communities for the future. We hear this time and time again from camp alumni. They internalize these values and they bring it into their future Jewish lives. Howard, your turn, you're up. Please tell us.
Thanks. So I'll give you two quick examples of inclusion in action, and then I'll talk about the diversity part. So the first one's a little more playful, that we always joked at Ramah, New England, that we knew that inclusion was working. We would always take the entire camp on the hottest day of the summer to Six Flags, the great big amusement park, not too far from camp. And there was something very special. The entire camp, everybody, campers and staff, are wearing the camp t-shirt. Everybody's dressed the same way. There's a lot of high-fiving that's going on, and people walking through the park all together. And everybody somehow wanted to be partners with the person with disabilities. And I think part of it was because they were genuinely friends. And part of it is that sometimes that person had that special access pass that didn't require waiting in line. So there were a lot of very playful interactions. But in the process, I think that some of the people without disabilities saw that how truly fearless some of the people with disabilities, were. Sometimes some people with autism love that stimulation of being whipped around on those roller coasters that go upside down. So there's a lot of really mutual learning that was going on. But my favorite serious example, every camp has color war, sport, whatever they call it. It's a very big deal in camp, either 2 teams or 4 teams. And I remember one day at Ramah, New England, walking around, and there was an ultimate Frisbee game about to take place between the green team and the white team. And I think that one of the teams looked up and they realized that the other team had a person who was a wheelchair user. He had a motorized scooter. And that could have really been a disaster. That could have not ended well because it's clearly, fair or unfair to one team. And sometimes the campers are just get this. They're just native inclusion natives because of how and when they grew up. And without missing a beat, one camper asked the wheelchair user, Sam. They said, Sam, do you have a second chair that we could use? And they ran back. He said, yes. They ran back to the bunk. They bought his second chair, and now both teams had a person up and a person, had a person in a chair, and the teams were even. There's a beautiful example solved by the participants. An example. The last thing I wanted to say is about kind of make the diversity part. Kind of how do campers make sense of the world, and this whole idea that really people are created, B'Tselem came in God's image. And I'm remembering that there was a day where a camper from the Tikvah program with autism was just having a total meltdown on a Friday afternoon, the kind that looked like he would not recover from. However, he recovered, he put on his Shabbos clothes, and proceeded to lead the camp in Kabbalah, Shabbat, and Mariv at the camp-wide davening. This is a very big deal, the entire camp. And I remember that moment, the 10-year-old kid trying to make sense of this world. How is it possible that this person who is having so many difficulties can do something that I may never be able to do? Not to mention many of the staff members who wouldn't feel comfortable getting up. And there was a beautiful moment, I think, because you have these ongoing opportunities for interaction. You're not just passing a person who's blind on the street and that's your interaction, but you have those 4 weeks or 8 weeks of ongoing interactions. And you get to see the range of strengths and weaknesses that we each have. So.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I want to spend a few minutes now talking about staff. The research I'm going to share now is mostly from a survey that I did of Ramah Tikvah staff. It's from a 2018 survey. I will say that this is particularly relevant and resonant as I was once a Ramah Tikvah staff. So this really does speak to me. But first, Ramah Tikvah staff talk about being on Tikvah staff having a profound personal impact. 44% describe the experience as life-changing, 60% say it's inspiring, 53% say it's eye-opening, 83% say gained appreciation for the life they're given, 81% say they become more patient. So working with campers with disability fundamentally reshapes staff identity and worldview. They don't just see it as a summer job. It is deeply transformative on a personal level. They really describe a shift in their perspectives, their priority, and what matters. They see themselves differently, and they approach their relationships differently. Nearly all of them, really 96%, describe having increased awareness and empathy as a result of working with kids with disabilities. And they also said that they start noticing accessibility issues everywhere. They also talk about increased comfort level with individuals with disabilities. And 80% also learned about issues of access to Jewish education. Oh, sorry. And also they talk about, do you still see my screen? Hello, do you see my screen still?
Yeah, we see your screen,
back at the first slide.
It switched back to the first slide.
Now do you see it? Is it on staff now?
Yes, it looks
okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay. Yes, I was sorry. Awareness and empathy. It doesn't turn off when the summer ends. These alumni, these staff talk about how they become advocates in their schools, synagogues. They push for accessibility and inclusion in other settings, and they carry this expectation of inclusion wherever they go. These staff also talk about transferable skills, that they gain skills that use in many other areas, that they gain these sort of critical capacities to learn to notice things, what a person needs, what's getting in their way. They learn to be flexible. They learn to be present. They learn to read people. They become better teachers, managers, leaders, and many say that they're better at their jobs because of their experience working with kids with disabilities. And finally, It shapes their life choices. Over half, it impacted their professional choice in charitable giving. Half influenced their choice of major in college. Over half are currently employed working with people with disabilities in this survey. And over half are engaged in volunteer advocacy work with people with disabilities. So as a result of working with people with disabilities, the staff that participate in the survey are committed to the work of inclusion. And these are the people that are creating the next generation of inclusion professionals and advocates. So they're going to shape schools, synagogues, organizations. They're going to bring the camp values and practices and into other settings. Okay. Elana, I'm going to out you, but I worked with Elana at camp. Elana, tell us, from your experience, what have you seen about the impact that camp can have on staff?
I mean, I would agree with everything. I mean, everything that you shared from your research, I've seen in practice. It's not just you and me, Abby, but it's so many people whose experience my own experience as a camper at Camp Ramah in California influenced my career decisions, my professional choices, what I've done with my life. I've seen it in lots of people, again, not just you, Abby, but so many other people who I've worked with. I've had the honor to really watch counselors grow in this way. And so many counselors who, are hesitant at first, as I was at first, who aren't sure they could do it, who aren't sure they have the skills or the training, which is something very common that we hear from lots of counselors, who really just excel. And all these things that you've seen, that you saw in your research, Abby, I've seen in real life and had the honor to watch, so many counselors and division heads grow into these where they really see inclusion as something that they are good at, inclusion as something that is important. They really see that, how to honor someone for who they are and not try to change them. Counselors have learned what it takes to modify an activity so that everybody can be successful in it. Counselors have learned how to have hard conversations with co-counselors or campers or parents. Counselors have learned the importance of having a community that values diversity. And it's been an honor to really see that in so many generations of counselors.
Thank you. Okay, one last area I want to talk about is families. Elana mentioned this earlier when she was talking about sort of Jewish connections, but families are deeply and profoundly transformed as a result of their kids' camping experiences. The first thing I want to talk about is parents move from advocacy fatigue to trust. So many of you are parents. I am a parent. Parents are exhausted. All parents are exhausted, just really bone tired. Parents with kids with disabilities are constantly advocating for their kids, constant vigilant. They are very tired of advocating for their kids. And when they come to camp, they find that they can finally trust that their kids are going to be taken care of. They no longer have to explain or justify or beg for an accommodation. They don't need to worry that their child's going to be excluded and hurt. They can trust that the staff is going to notice their needs, adapt activities, and include their child. And parents say that they feel generally welcome. They're not just tolerated. And this is a huge relief for parents, that they don't need to be on all the time. They don't have to explain or protect. They can just be parents, and their kids can just be kids. Again, Elana mentioned this, but camps become families' Jewish homes. For many families, they haven't been able to find Jewish homes elsewhere, and camp becomes the place where they find connection. It's also the place where they find year-round engagement. It spills over into their family's life throughout the entire year. They participate in programs that camp offers from September through June. Their giving increases, so their financial support increases. They take on leadership roles. And most importantly, they connect to other like-minded families during the school year. So camp has a ripple effect. It's not just about the child, but families who are disengaged from Jewish life find homes in camp and become actively engaged as a result. So it brings them home to Jewish community. Howard, do you want to share an example of how you've seen this?
Sure. I have to go back to something you said about staffing before. You reminded me that my story is different than everybody else's. I actually came by accident in 1984 to fill, I wasn't a Ramah person like either of you. I came from outside to work in the kitchen with my best friend. And there was an opening in something called the Tikvah program, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I just gave it a shot. And I guess I got hooked because 40 years later, I'm still doing the same thing. So that's my origin story. So there you go. I didn't think to even talk about that in the beginning. A lot of what I'd say about families is similar to what you said before. I think that you become you become their rabbi, you become their everything. You are their Jewish life, because I think that we still haven't gotten far enough out there in the home communities. I think that's a sentiment that you hear. I think families stay in touch with us long after their kids are no longer in camp. They still don't always feel. I mean, we're definitely making strides. It's not like it was in the early years, but we're not quite there yet. I think it's because we made it very easy, because camp is just this Gan Eden. It's this paradise. And again, you said this, Abby. My example was that I think at Ramah, New England, there was like one person, a chef, who has been there almost from the beginning. And he's the only person who remembers camp before it had a Tikvah program. But everybody, it's just like you said, it's as natural as having, Shabbat brownies and Hebrew plays. It's just what we do. So that's, I think that parents are so appreciative about that. I think one of the things that the families appreciate in Tikvah is that camp is one of those places where we offer vocational training. Okay. I think that's the we didn't really, Elana talked about the different models. And again, it comes back to, I just am so taken by how visionary our founders were. Because I remember in 1984, we had this rundown pre-voc room with a Fisher-Price dial-up phone and filing and folding and things like that. And we were beginning to think about what happens next. So I think that's the part I really want to focus on, is that, the trajectory in camp that we all talk about is that, you go till you're 16, ideally you have that transition year to Israel, and then you come back and you serve on staff for as many years as your parents let you, until either this becomes your real job or you transition to something that's outside of camp. And I think that the founders realized that the same would be the case with people with disabilities. So already they were teaching pre-voc skills, and that evolved into a vocational training program. And again, you'll probably talk a little bit about funding, but sometimes when you do the right thing, funding follows. Okay. And I think a camp uncle said, wait a minute, what's going to happen with my niece when she finishes camp? And the Greenberg said, I don't know, maybe we could build a vocational training program. And that's how the vocational training building at Ramah, New England started. And then people with disabilities started filling these very important jobs in camp. Like where else can you get your snack or toilet paper? Only from the hands of a person with a disability who's working in that particular area. And then camp took on staff hiring, because there's a huge problem out there in the world of unemployment or underemployment of people with disabilities. So I think that families sort of stay in touch with us, and they consult with, like, I'm sure Elana, she hasn't been there. I've been there. You still get calls from families who say, now my kid is X age. And I'll just end with this, with what really is something very kind of important to keep in mind. I think in the old days, people weren't thinking about people with disabilities living long. They thought that no one imagined people with disabilities living into adulthood. Well, when I was a counselor in 1984, and I was like 19 or 20 years old, I had campers in my bunk. And guess what? They're still around. And I get a Rosh Hashanah and a Pesach card every year from Matthew, who's in my bunk for 2 years. Matthew has been an adult who's employed, he's had relationships, and he's very involved with Yachad in Boston, has a very meaningful Jewish life. And just something important to keep in mind as we start talking about getting religious school right and synagogue right. What do we do about the 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds? Because thank God, people with disabilities are around, and we owe it to them to have a meaningful Jewish life even to that point. So that's a challenge for us to think about.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Actually, a good segue, talking about vocational program. I'm going to run through this next piece very quickly because I want to leave time for questions. And I thought I had nothing to say. It turns out I could talk about this for a long time. Who knew? Okay. So I talked about so many wonderful things and all the benefits of inclusive camping for so many different people. It's really hard work. This is not easy work. It takes a lot to make this happen. I do want to share a bit about what that looks like and what are the characteristics of camps that make this happen. And try to be quick so that you have time for questions. Okay, first I want to talk about investment. A lot of this research that I'm going to share comes from my work with the Foundation for Jewish Camp and the Weinberg Foundation. And I want to give the Foundation for Jewish Camp has worked with a lot of different foundations. I'm just going to highlight the Weinberg Foundation because they have done unbelievably transformative work in this space. The research that I did was evaluating what's called the Yashar Initiative, which gave $12 million to 46 camps to do capital improvements for camps to do capital improvements for disabilities. So, and I will tell you, it was transformative. So I just wanted to name that as I sort of share these findings. Okay, so things that camps do, inclusive camps do, qualities, characteristics that make them work. One, facilities. Facilities matter. Physical infrastructure transforms what's possible. This can look like big projects, large projects, so pools and indoor programming areas, health centers, ropes course, or it could be smaller projects, paths and ramps, accessible entrances, shaded areas. They require resources. They require grants and funds and commitments and camp leadership priorities and projects and multi-year planning. But the investment is really powerful and it absolutely is transformative. People can see it, it's visible. So a camp director can walk around camp and say, we believe in this. This is our value because you can point to something and parents can see it. They can say that you're serious about inclusion because you can point to something. Physical spaces change culture. They're a visible sign of camp's commitment. Accessible cabins and multi-use spaces become gathering places for everyone. When we talk about these reciprocal relationships, we create spaces. We can create these physical spaces that allow that to happen. We talked about universal design. Those are spaces that allow everyone to naturally and organically interact. And we talked also about those small things, the ramps. Those are not small. The paved path, that allows all those things we're talking about at the way beginning about independence and dignity and belonging, that allows all those things to happen. So facilities matter. 2, staff investment. People matter. Camps professionalize inclusion roles. They hire skilled experts, year-round positions, and have ongoing training. So when camps invest in people, sorry, I lost my track for a second. So
when camps invest in people.
Sorry, thank you. That camps professionalize inclusion roles. They move from volunteers to skilled experts. So it's not just summer counselors, but they're people with expertise. They're better staff to camper ratios. They have training throughout the summer. There's a lot that needs to make this happen. You need to prioritize in your budget. You need to have the infrastructure for training. You need to have outside expertise, but it makes a lot of these changes possible. And last but not least, you need partnerships and external expertise. So I mentioned FJC and the Weinberg Partnership. You need funding, you need grants, and you also need to work with disability organizations. You need to work with your local school district. Sometimes you need to work with private schools to recruit or different Jewish organizations, but you need to use the resources that are available to you. So the camps that were most successful did not go at this alone. They used the resources and they really reached out and said, help me, let's do this together. The second thing I want to talk about is leadership. Leadership is critical. Senior leadership that make inclusion non-negotiable was key in making inclusion successful. Now, strong leadership requires both institutional will and personal conviction. They need board alignment and support. They need budget authority to allocate resources. They need to be able to communicate a vision. They need the courage to make inclusion non-negotiable. They need to be present. But they are the ones that determine whether inclusion succeeds or stalls. They help shape behavior, and they also transfer that to the rest of the camp community. And when leadership is fully committed, that's when the outcomes are most magical. You can have the same resources, but different results depending on what happens in leadership. If the leadership is committed, it can have a ripple effect, can change culture, and you can get community buy-in. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is readiness and sustainability. So readiness is the foundational capacity, organizational and physical, that camps need to successfully move forward, to move towards deeper inclusion. So you can't skip steps. New investment builds on existing foundations. So readiness includes organizational capacity and also physical infrastructure. Both are important. But what we found in the research is that some camps were more immediately successful because they had some foundational capacity, people and infrastructure already in place. Others needed time to develop that capacity first. Both are good. The key is understanding where camps are and building systematically. Another thing is having patience and organizational learning, realizing that changing inclusion practices is a process, not a quick fix. So camps that were sort of in for the long haul and didn't give up after one failed summer, they were the most successful. And last but not least, camps that had sustainability structures. So camps that build systems and policies and practice embedded inclusion into their operations that ensured that it survived beyond an individual champion and in leadership transitions, those were the ones that were most successful. I feel like I ran through that, but I really do want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. Okay. Looking beyond camp. Ellie, I want to check our time, but I have some questions for Elana and Howard, but I'd love in our last few minutes to open up if anyone else has questions.
Yeah, there are definitely questions from the chat. Some of them you guys have gotten to, some you haven't. So I'm gonna ask them. I'm gonna add some spotlights here. Give me a second. I'm multitasking, as it were. And you know what? I guess I might as well spotlight myself too. There you go. Here I am. Hi, everyone. So a lot of the questions and I'm sure you guys will have interact and develop this, but a lot of questions are about, I think, and Howard spoke a little about this in the way that the vocational training is like, what is the positioning of people at camp afterwards? And do some of the people who were part of, these programs, do they become support staff themselves? And I'm guessing it very much depends person to person and program to program, but is there a kind of trajectory in which you see modeling amongst the people who are coming in through inclusion programs as being then part of the leadership of inclusion programs? Maybe not the leadership, but part of or present in.
Yeah, I mean, I could say. I mean, I think that was really very much the thinking that you really have to. I think when you start doing inclusive camping, we have to sort of rethink what the trajectory is. We talked about, being a camper and then coming back on staff. Well, not everybody has to come back and be a bunk counselor. There are a lot of jobs in camp, and people can work on maintenance staff, not just even for non-disabled people. You need teachers, you need lifeguards. And I think creating those other opportunities to work in camp. So I think that we used to call this voc ed and then, post voc ed. And then we once had a person in that program who said, Howard, why don't you just call us staff? And the light bulb went off. He was totally right. And we said, we should call this staff, and then in kind of invisible letters, supported staff. And the great thing is, in my mind, it opened up the possibility that it like a lot of people need support, not only people who came through the disabilities program, but what about a staff member who has a medical issue, who has Crohn's or something, that needs an accommodation to be able to not be insubordinate. They weren't acting out by not being at their assignment. They needed an accommodation. So I think that it helps shift accommodations. Like, I mean, the problem with of jobs, this is something we're still trying to tackle, is that in camp, it's paradise, and you can have people working in all those areas in camp that I mentioned. The problem is there's a the unemployment rate for people with disabilities, even with college degrees, is through the roof. It's a very big problem in society. I mean, for another conversation, I'm really trying to tackle that, but it's a very big problem. So, whatever we do in camp doesn't always translate, but we have success stories. The young man who was supposed to work in the kitchen, and he said, my parents want me to work in the kitchen. I hate working in the kitchen. Can I do something else? We put him in the gun working with little kids. He was, till this day, a rock star. Imagine having a guy being able to take your little boy to the bathroom and change his bathing suit. It was amazing. And they don't care how he learns. He was amazing. And then he got a job working in his community in childcare. There's a real shortage of people working in early childhood. So it's win, win, win. So we have these stories, but to scale it up hasn't really happened enough. But that's more outside of camp, I think.
This question came in for Elana. And Abby, do you mind if I just kind of pepper these in? And
Please.
There are actually a lot of questions, and very much of them based in the practical application of this. We are not in a theoretical universe today. We were in a place in where people have real questions about how this functions in the world. Elana, this is a question about how, if there's more of a direction towards inclusion in camp as opposed to these kind of more separate programs, does that limit the availability of camp programs for people with higher needs or more full-time needs that, say, the original incarnation of Tikvah might have been better suited for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Abby and Howard and I did talk about that in our preparing for today. And I'll just say that, first of all, I'll say that not every camp can be everything to everyone. And if you promise that you can be, you're going to fail. And that's worse for these families, right? The last thing we want to do is to say, sure, we can support your child, and then figure out, 2 weeks in or 1 week in or 1 day in that we actually can't support your child. So we want to make sure that every camp is sort of deciding how they support kids with disabilities in a way that makes sense for who their camp is, right? Every camp should support campers with disabilities in some way, I think. But it's going to look different at every camp. So I'll just say that. And it should look different in every camp. Every camp looks different one from the next. Even if you just look at the Ramah camps, each Ramah camp looks so different one from the next. So I just will start off by saying that. All that to say that, yes, right, depending on what kind of program you offer is going to inform what kind of camper you can support. And this might be a hot take, but we see that the disability and inclusion world is moving more towards, and I'm going to put it in quotes, inclusion, because it means something different to lots of different people. And so that's sort of a buzzword, and I actually don't really even like that word because it means something different to so many different people. Because I would say, right, the program that we run at Ramah in Ojai, I would call it an inclusion program, even though there are moments where campers are self-contained, which is the other word that we use, right? This sort of self-contained versus inclusion. And because we offer a range of support, because camps can offer, right, individualized attention or more opportunities to be with neurotypical peers, or an hour a day with neurotypical peers, and then everybody, right? Because we can offer a range, it means we can support a wide range of camper. If we were just to move to an inclusion, a fully inclusive model, again, I'll use the quotes because I believe what we are doing is inclusive, but what sort of people think of as fully inclusive, which is kids completely integrated, it would mean that we'd have to say no to a lot of the kids that we serve, and we're not ready to do that. And so, yes, it's going to affect who you can take, but the other important piece is to know what camps out there can take what types of kids. So if you are having a conversation with a family and you say, actually, that's not right for my camp, but here's the 5 camps that is right for your kid that we think might serve your kid. That's how we also want to be in community with each other, to make sure that we are assuring that families end up at the place that's best for their kid.
Is there a central house, is there a central body that people can go to say this is the right camp for my kid?
Howard does that for the Ramah Commission.
Right. So I get a lot of those kind of calls. Yeah, we've tried to make that a little more centralized, so a family doesn't have to call each director and say what's the approach. I'll sort of list them and say based on geography and needs. Can I add something, Elana, to what you said? Is it okay?
Please.
So a couple of thoughts. I always say that when you said that even though it's a separate division, it is inclusive. I always say, if you think about it, Ramah is not completely inclusive. If you have 3 children, 9, 12, and 15, they're doing their day in a separate track. They're not seeing their siblings the whole day, except for maybe in the dining room or maybe, on the pathway. It's separate. So I say that Tikvah is a mixed age division that travels on its own with all these opportunities to do things with other divisions being pushed in, or that's one thing. The other thing is, I'm the person at Ramah New England who started this inclusion, which formerly known as a program. We know that we can't call it a program because that really, you can't be inclusive and a program. So it's like inclusive camping. But interestingly enough, we were approached by a family who said, would you consider inclusion? There's this thing out. Have you ever heard of this thing out there in the world called inclusion? And we said, I've heard of it, but in school systems, not in camp. There was absolutely no literature at all. And we found this professor of inclusive camping at the State University of New York, New Paltz, who guided us to the process. He said, I don't know anything about camps, but let's do it together. And we just didn't know how it was going to go. What was going to, we thought maybe in the younger ages it would be more successful and then the gaps would widen. We had no idea, right? Interestingly enough, when we talked to our camp families, I'd say half of the families with kids with disabilities said, if it's not fully inclusive, I want no part of it. The other half said, if it is inclusive, I want no part of it, because they knew that their kids had higher support needs and that they might have been physically in the bunk with like typical kids, but they would be having a really hard time. They'd be anxious, the day would be too long. So we said, we're going to do both and everything in the middle. I think that's really what we do. And like Elana said, it's not McDonald's where the burger is the same in every McDonald's across the country. But if you go to Elana's camp, you'll see beautiful things, which are going to be a little different than the beautiful things you see in Wisconsin. And at the same moment that Ramah, Wisconsin's Tikvah program evolved out of having separate bunks and only had inclusion, Ramah Berkshire's, which only started off as inclusion, now has both, including separate bunks. And I really think we should embrace that. And if a family has a particular ideology, we can talk about it and say, oh, well, if you want to do that, you may have to go to this camp in Wisconsin, but we could talk about it. So it's very, we're doing a lot of things all at one time.
So Abby, I think this, and this probably is our last question, just in terms of timing, but this one might be more for you. Is there in that talking about, I think this really gave a great sense of why camping is important. And I loved how when we started this conversation before, you were like, well, this isn't so revolutionary. And the more I was listening, I'm like, this is totally revolutionary. This is, there's some big stories here. The statistics that you presented are amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't think the sort of thing that people think about very often. And I think we often see these dark, hard things in these kinds of relationships. And it's really amazing to be able to celebrate these positive moments. So the question that one of our participants asks, is there a way of judging a camp for that idea of foundational readiness? Like, are there benchmarks? Are there things that camps need to have in place in order to get to a place where they can be in this more inclusive model?
That is a great question. Elana and Howard, you guys will probably know more about this, but some of the things are, so we're actually, the Weinberg Foundation actually just gave another grant to the Foundation for Jewish Camp to start vocational programs. I think they're calling it something else. I don't remember what they're calling it. But that's part of what we're going to be looking at, is trying to help determine where sort of camps are on their inclusion journey. So we're going to look at things like, what kind of infrastructure do they have? We're going to look at what their leadership structures are. So we're going to talk to their senior leadership.
From Foundation for Jewish Camp says it's skills training. So we'll put that in there right now.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks, Steph, for coming today. We are so glad you were here.
Thank you. Skills training. What kind of leadership they have. So do they have a year-round person devoted to this? What kind of summer staff do they have? What kind of structures do they have in place? What kind of training do they have? What kind of intake processes? What kind of documentation? There are all sorts of questions that we might sort of ask the camp to determine sort of where they are in their inclusion journey. Elana and Howard, do you want to add to that?
I would just say that, Howard, I'll defer to you next, but I would just say that it also has a lot to do with leadership, right? The leadership has to be ready and willing to say yes, and willing to try something a little out of the box, and likely willing to fail a little bit, right? Because that's how we learn. But it has a lot to do with leadership, and not to wait till the perfect, right? I think one of the things that has stumbled, I know, in educational settings and in camping settings, is sort of waiting, like, oh, we don't have the right person, we don't have the trained person, we don't have the right amount of money, we don't have, sort of waiting for the perfect, not that there's a right? But just feeling confident in your team and being ready to say yes. And it has to come from the leadership of the camp. It's important to have staff that believe it, but it has to come from the leadership also.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. It comes from above, and you have to believe it in your kishkas. And there are still people who are skeptics who think that this is going to, that the normal kids are going to leave. Some people still believe that, and they won't say that. But I think that if the overall director and the board believes it, it becomes reality. There's a program in Israel called Special in Uniform for soldiers with disabilities, and I've taken some groups to visit these bases. And when the prototypical base commander, who looks like what you think he looks like, has 1,000 soldiers on his base, and he says this base has soldiers with disabilities, no one argues with that. And you know what? It becomes the norm, and it becomes just what you do. And I think that's how the camps are. If the director believes it, it becomes. And you know what? You could say, if you don't feel comfortable working in a camp with kids like this, there are a lot of other summer jobs. Yeah, but in my camp, this is how we do things. So that's really important.
I will just share to add to that, Howard. One of the camps I visited as part of my work with the Yashar Initiative, one of the Weinberg's funded camp. The director of the camp has her office overlooking the splash pad that was funded from the Weinberg grant, because she wanted a reminder all the time of why she does what she does. And I thought that was, really, you look out at the splash pad and they're just kids of all abilities playing together, and it is a beautiful, beautiful sight. And she just said, this is why I do what I do. And when she says that and she feels that all the time, that is palpable, and she conveys that to all of her staff. So to echo what Elana and Howard said, that feeling is really important, and that really makes a difference to everything that happens. So
this is such a, in this really cold, for many of us, those of us who aren't in Israel, it is both very cold in the United, maybe those of us who don't live
in Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. In Berkeley too, it's probably not as cold, but this has been such a warm and lovely way to reflect and to start our Hanukkah. So thank you all for sharing and for being part of this with us. Again, thanks for all of our participants who've been involved through You Say You Want a Revolution. I feel like I've gained a really great sense of what revolution means and how it differs and changes for everyone. Keep an eye out for our next series, and thanks again to our partners from the National Ramah Camping Movement for being here today and for sharing with us. And thank you, Abby, for being such a great partner and for helping out this initiative and for sharing your research. Oh, and I'm getting so many good reactions. Their hearts. I don't know if you guys can see it, but their hearts, their claps, everybody. There's a lot of enthusiasm in the room. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.